Hi, and welcome to our webinar today. We're looking at annual stewardship resources and ideas for you to introduce stewardship as a year-round campaign, perhaps for your congregation, and perhaps some intentional programs and intentional ways that you introduce stewardship and generosity and giving today. So we're really welcome to have you and join you today. So today's webinars will provide resources for talking about stewardship in your congregation, and just a little plug that these are made possible by your gifts to Presbyterian Sharing. Bruce will be talking about some resources they have to offer, which are also available free of charge for you to download, the electronic downloads, and we'll provide more information about that later. And let me begin by introducing the Stewardship and Planned Giving staff who've joined us here today as well. I'm Karen Plater, and I'm the Associate Secretary. And we're joined by Maggie Lewin, who's the Gifts and Database Administrator. And she's really competent at handling your gifts, whether it's gifts of security, your planned gifts, as well as helping to ensure that correspondence is sent out to congregations and individuals who give other gifts. Jim McDonald is our development manager, and he's really helped pull together this webinar today. This is his baby, and I'll be turning it over to him in a minute. And then Heather Chappell is our education program coordinator and provides lots of resources for you on the website and on Presbyterian Sharing and print resources. And she's gonna take charge of the Q&A sessions. So we're the staff and we're here to help. We're accessible anytime. We love to talk to you. So with that, I think turning it over to Jim.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I want to start out, our first slide today is about the fact that we did a stewardship survey last year. We asked about 360 different churches, or we asked all the churches, and about 360 responded, which is a terrific response, very statistically usable. And so we got some answers to some important questions that are pertinent for our conversation today. So first off, the pie chart here represents the answer to the question, does your congregation have an intentional program to encourage generous giving? Basically a stewardship campaign. And of the 360 churches that responded, 284, almost 80%, said no, they didn't have one at all. And about 21% said yes, they did. So one of the great things about the program we're going to talk about today is we can help that 80% start to do something intentional, because it's a terrific program for doing intentional stewardship, an intentional stewardship campaign. Let's look at a couple of other responses that we got. Is stewardship a sermon topic at your church? Well, for 61% it is. That's terrific. How about, does your congregation talk about topics related to money? Of the 362 who responded, 58% said they talked about money several times a year, which takes some courage, and we want to encourage that. 40% said once a year, so a very specific targeted day of talking about money and stewardship. And then about 3% said never. So I'm certainly hoping that everyone will be encouraged and helped out by the opportunities made available through this program that we're going to talk about today. But you can see that there's a need, especially for about almost half the church at least. And it's an opportunity, a new tool that everyone can use. Finally, how often do you run a stewardship campaign? Among those that actually did run one, 17% said they ran it a 3 to 5 week program, and about 50% said they integrated stewardship throughout the year. And what's great about the program we're going to talk about today is that it accommodates both ways of doing a stewardship program. And with that, I'm going to introduce you to the author of the program, and the gentleman who's going to be presenting for most of today, and that's Reverend Bruce Barkauer. Bruce, welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Jim. It's such a pleasure to be with you today. I'm really grateful for the invitation and looking to have some great conversation with the Canadian Presbyterians. Thank you so much.
Well, I'd like to tell everybody about you. Now, Reverend Barkauer teaches generosity for a living, and he is a noted speaker, an educator, a consultant, and writer. Bruce brings creativity and energy and sometimes humorous thought into conversations about stewardship as a practice of faith and spiritual discipline. And we're grateful to have him with us today. Bruce served as a parish pastor for 25 years before accepting a call to serve as the first minister for faith and giving for the Christian Church and the Disciples of Christ. He's married to Laura, and they share 3 children and 3 grandchildren. Welcome, Bruce. So, Bruce, would you tell us about your new program, a little bit about your new program, and as we discuss it, we'll go through a series of slides that you and I developed in conversation in anticipation of our webinar today.
Sure, Jim, I'd be happy to, and thanks a lot. And the slide you all see now is a graphic piece, art piece representing the theme for our materials this year. My office produces materials every year, and this year the theme is From Bread and Cup to Faith and Giving. And what we're really thinking about here is the way in which we encounter the radical welcome and invitation to the table, the abundance of grace that we receive there. And that in that moment, the sense that we are changed, we are transformed, we are called to be acting with the same generosity that we have received from the table, with the same grace we have received at the table where we celebrate the Lord's Supper or communion, depending on your tradition. And so it's thinking about stewardship as a response, as something reflexive to the activity of God. And if you think about the way in which stewardship texts are presented in the biblical witness, you'll notice, particularly those with the tithe, have to do with giving from what one has already received. The idea that we become a blessing because we are already blessed. We don't give to try to encourage God to be kind or generous to us. It's in God's nature to be that way toward us, which again, we see represented most clearly at the table and the invitation that comes there. And so we think that the encounter there calls us to go forward into the world, to be generous and to be transforming agents of the divine in the world, to represent the good news of the gospel, and to do that with our whole life. So that's kind of the basis of the theme, that God extends grace and sufficiency to us, and in response, then we carry that into the world. It kind of plays off the Genesis 1 poem, if you will, of being created in the image of God and being given dominion over the face of the earth, which rather than being some power we exercise to crush and exploit, in the image of God, we rule the way that God rules, which is for the benefit of all things, for their ability to flourish. And I would argue that poem right there in Genesis 2:15, in the other creation story we have, where Adam is in the garden and told to serve and protect the garden, create an understanding that it's our existential nature to be stewards, that's who we are. And so we live our life as stewards in response to that.
Now, thank you very much for that. That introduces the basic theme. One of the things we wanted to talk about was just how the program isn't just one kind of program, it's adaptable.
Sure. Yeah, we've created this to be adaptable at several levels, but most importantly, that depending on your context, and every context is unique and different. The players involved in leadership, the culture of the congregation, et cetera, they're all unique. And so we wanted material that understood that and allowed you the ability to utilize the material in your context in the way you believe it will work best for you. We hope that most congregations who are able to will think about doing this year long, that the primary layout is understood as a year-long conversation that takes place over the majority of the year and culminates at some point in an ask. But we want to have some time to reflect and think about this invitation. Rather than kind of rushing it in a 3-week sprint, we'd like to ideally have this as a marathon that we engage in through the whole year, so that when we get ready for the ask, for people to make a commitment to really thoughtfully pray about the way they're being called to support the ministry and mission of the church, they've had a long time to engage in that conversation. However, that doesn't work everywhere. And so for some, there's a spring campaign that's your tradition, and you're running a campaign April, May for a fiscal year that may end June 30, start July 1, and you got to have all those numbers in place. So the campaign is set up to be able to be used that way. In the same way that for others for whom a traditional fall campaign, where we tie pretty close to Thanksgiving in the States, that's late November. I know in Canada, that's in October, but somewhere in the fall, you're tying somewhere into an ask in a shorter time frame, 3 or 4 weeks. And so the material allows you to do that as well, but it also says, okay, we're going to run a spring campaign, but now here's a way we can use additional material that's in the package we've received to continue that conversation throughout the year. And in the same way, you can use a hybrid model the other way, which is we're going to have some conversations. We're going to preach about stewardship and think about stewardship moving into the November season, and then we'll do our normal kind of 3-week intensive conversation and preaching, but we're not going to just wait until then to do it. And the materials lay out in such a way that you can do that. Ultimately, we're heading toward an ask. And whether that conversation is 8 months or 4 weeks, ultimately we want to prep people for an opportunity to faithfully respond to that ask.
Yeah, Bruce, I wanted to point out something that you mentioned in one of the supporting documents for your program, and that is that congregations that engage in a regular and intentional annual stewardship emphasis receive 2 to 3 times the resources for ministry operations than those that do not engage in the practice. I think what you're really saying is, if not this program, our program is certainly wise to undertake.
Absolutely. You want to take this seriously. And if you're using some other program, that's fine, just so you're having the conversation. After all, stewardship is spiritual discipline, right? It's a part of faith formation and practice. So to not have conversations about this is really to do a disservice to our people, and to not expose them to the fullness of spiritual practice that includes worship and prayer and study and service to others, but also the practice of generosity with our time and the old saying, our talents and our treasure, that all of those things move toward that. But for working with the mission of the church to ensure that mission can be fulfilled, it does take financial resources. And we're going to be honest about that and give people a chance to determine how they want to invest in that.
Right on. So if we want to run an effective stewardship campaign, this is a good example of how it's done. So it's great to study and take pieces and parts or the whole thing, depending on, right? You can use it a la carte if you want to.
That's right. And we modeled our program after the old Consecration Day model that Gilbert Davis and the Christian Church Disciples of Christ brought to us back in the 60s and 70s. And it was later printed by Herb Miller and then adapted by other denominations who shared that resource. But essentially, it's doing some intentional planning leading up to that ask. You're putting the church's mission in front of people and reminding them about the impact that you have. You're looking for ways to tell your story. We find narrative budgets to be another tool that you can use to help do this, and we provide access to resources for that tool as well within our materials. But the old Consecration Day model moved toward an event. And in the old days, it was a church supper. Now, COVID and cultural changes have made a dinner maybe not the best option, but we still think an event of some kind that you're inviting people to come to as a celebration. is really important. And by the way, if they weren't in worship at that time, you might just happen to have some commitment cards available you could share with them. And the other advantage is if you're doing an event and even if you're serving pie and lemonade, right? You want an RSVP so you have enough materials, right? So you have enough cake and cookies or whatever for everybody. And in this model, this gives you an opportunity to make phone calls to people and not ever talk about money or pledge cards or anything else. We just want to know if you're coming. And if you haven't made up your mind yet, we're going to have extra. So if at the last minute it turns out you can come on Sunday to hear the children sing at 3:00 in the sanctuary, that's great, or whatever your event's going to be. And those phone calls, those are really good pieces of contact for, and again, we're not talking about money. Nobody has to ask for a pledge card in that model. And we think that that's really helpful. The other thing is that we've made these very adaptable to the size of your congregation. We have a special article in there relative to adapting to the small church, but you don't have to have a church of 1,000 members to make this work. A church of 35 members, you can still do this. You don't need as many people in leadership. You don't need as many of the moving parts as we suggest, and we offer ways in which to adapt to that smaller size. But everybody benefits from preaching on stewardship. Everybody benefits from a conversation about the impact of the church's mission. Everyone benefits from an opportunity to think about and consider how it is they're being called to support that mission and ministry and vision of the church. So whether you're a big church or a small church, this kind of campaign provides entrees into those conversations, gives you tools for facilitating those events, and we think it's very powerful regardless of whether you've got 35 on Sunday morning or 3,500.
Well, I think that for a lot of our listeners, or viewers, we're not going to be familiar with this idea of a consecration day. So, if you wouldn't mind, you don't have to talk through the whole thing, but could you just familiarize ourselves with how that works?
Well, in the traditional model, usually you're bringing in a guest speaker for Consecration Day, along with having what they used to call a victory dinner, a celebration dinner. Again, that's to drive people to the event, people you wouldn't normally see, people who on a normal Stewardship Sunday might choose to go fishing, right? Might choose to be someplace else. The idea is to put a little pizzazz in it that attracts people. This is marketing. I hate to say it so crassly, but I mean that's a piece of what this is. It also brings the benefit of an outside voice, of course, is that they can say things that the preacher normally might have difficulty saying from the pulpit. And I mean positive things, not overly challenging things, but there's an air to having an outside speaker that does that. And the traditional Consecration Sunday does that. In our model, we offer that as an option. But essentially, you can do this in just a few weeks. You get some stewardship sermons lined up for the 4 Sundays that precede this. You get some individuals who will give testimony or bear witness to their own generosity, why they give to the church. You may choose to bring in an outside group that you support missionally with your dollars to come and talk about what that means to them and a chance to say thank you. You're using these Sundays to have the stewardship conversation. And then if you have church school or small group Bible studies or whatever, you're reminding people about the Consecration Day event, inviting them to come, encouraging them to fill out a reservation card so we know they're coming. We'll do a follow-up the week before with phone calls, as I mentioned. You're putting it in the newsletters, your social media. You're just really, you're making an intentional effort that they pretty much would have to be dead not to know something's happening that month at church and that particular day. And so unless they're really hiding deeply under a rock, they're at least going to know. And so afterward, when you send a letter that says, hey, we missed you, we didn't receive a commitment card, or however you want to choose to have that conversation in email, and we offer some suggestions for how to do that, they're not surprised. And you're giving them one more just in case you missed it. Here's an opportunity. And then the other thing we do, we have a second follow-up letter in our program because we want to communicate with those who did make a gift and say, first of all, thank you. Most important 2 words we can ever say when it comes to people's giving. And we want to confirm the amounts that we based on the commitment card you turned in, you're going to do this over 52 weeks at this much a week, or once a month at this much per month, or at the end of the year with a stock transfer. We just want to communicate the details and one more time tell them the good things that are going to happen because of their generosity. That's the basic model.
And in your materials, you call this an every member canvas program.
Right.
Right, because you're trying to reach all the members, and this is really the strategy of the program is designed to make sure that you've reached out to everybody.
That's exactly right.
And as much as you're talking about how it has a kind of a marketing spin to it, the truth is this all comes back down to something much more important than strategy. We're trying to actually communicate something. And I wondered if you would speak to this issue.
Well, sure. We know this to be true, and we know how the nature of giving has changed in the church. My mother just passed a month ago, 96, was going to be 97 years old on her 97th birthday in May, and she gave to the church because it was the church, and it's what she did. And there were several institutions like that which Mom supported and never questioned. They're there, they're good for the community, they do good work, and I know that intrinsically, I know that intuitively, and so she would write checks. The culture has changed now that we really want to see that there are actual results being performed by the people we give money to. Baby boomers are about half and half on that, and everybody younger is all in on that. They want to pay for performance. Show me what you do. Show me how you make a difference. What is it you do and why does it matter? And so the program we put together really drives you to have those conversations. And a narrative budget is another tool, as I mentioned, that helps you show that, demonstrate that. That we're engaged in transformational work. This is why it matters. It's never about the budget. It's always about the mission. It's always about the vision we have that we believe God has given us, that this is what we are to be as church. We should never be talking about the budget in a stewardship campaign. And unfortunately, most of us, that's all we talk about. And people don't want to pay your light bill. They got their own light bill to pay. They got their own budgeting to do. And it's the only reason we're talking about money is to do ministry. So let's talk about why we're talking about the money, which is to do ministry.
Yeah, and we in our stewardship department website in presbyterian.ca/stewardship, we have a narrative budget page as well. We're very committed to this idea. I think it's a very important one. I'm glad you're presenting materials on that. Let's jump over to purpose. And if you want to speak to these ideas for a moment.
Well, sure. Our programs are a little bit different. For the consecration model, you can buy the book that Herb Miller wrote still. It's still in print on Amazon, and it's, about 80 pages or so, most of which is repeating what the last 30 pages said in the next 30 pages. There's not a lot to it. It's that basic consecration outline and just holding you to do it the way they prescribe it. We've gone a little different with this. We start with a biblical and theological premise. And our materials, I think what makes our materials uniquely different and so rich is that we spend a lot of time with that biblical material. We see this as spiritual practice and discipline, and we want to approach it that way. We want to give resources to the preacher that helps take a little of the discomfort out of preparing a stewardship sermon. We're not giving you sermons that are already written, but we're giving you for the texts that we prescribe, and we'll pick up some conversation on those going forward a little bit. But we provide for the preacher often 8 to 12 pages of exegesis on the text and how to think about talking about this in your congregation. So we're going to give you that rich biblical theological background, and we're going to further give that to your lay people through Bible study. We've created Bible study curriculum so that for your midweek or Sunday school classes, or however you do your adult children's studies, that there's material to reinforce what you're doing in the pulpit and utilizing these texts. That really is the driving force in our material that makes them unique and different. And then, of course, as we've already talked about, the story of what you do and why you do it, why it matters, and giving people space then to think about what their place is in supporting that mission.
All right, so I think this is a good time. Heather, would you like to come in and?
Sure. If anybody has a question for Bruce, feel free to type it in the chat box. And if we don't have questions now, if you think of something, type it in the chat box and we'll ask for the next time. Currently, there are no questions.
I know I'm not that thorough, so don't be bashful.
Well, we can keep going, and we're going to have another opportunity to answer questions. And Heather, please feel free to interrupt us anytime.
Of course.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what we're going to do is now we're going to walk through the contents of the program, which it comes in folders. Is that right, Bruce?
Yeah, it comes in electronic folders, and each folder has specific types of information in it. The first folder is essentially just explaining the material and talking about the theme and how to best use these resources. You'll notice it says understanding how the resources work by design, which means we've been running this material a long time with different themes and different elements, and we kind of have a pretty good sense of what has helped congregations get good response. So if we suggest you do something, I think it's in your best interest to do it and prove us wrong.
Well, at least consider it, right?
That's right. Strongly consider doing it the way we suggested, because there's a lot of experience behind this material with proven results. So we've laid it out so that you can get the best results, because that's our goal for you. Is that you can do more mission and ministry. We talked already about that. There's notes in there about adaptation for your own church and leadership. We set up job descriptions for what would be a church of roughly 100 worshiping attendants. And so you might need a few more or a few less, and some notes are there about that. But we just set up, who do you need to help run this campaign? You need a communications person, right? You need a leader, obviously, who's going to kind of hold folks to schedule and task. If you're doing an event, you need a coordinator for that. You need a communications person, somebody who's going to help coordinate the educational elements. All of those types of pieces are in there. And again, if you're a small church, you won't need all that. You won't need as many people. And we tell you how to do that. We also suggest, based on the text we've identified to reinforce this theme, that you have a layperson speak on the Sundays when you're exploring this theme. And so we lay out there who might be best in your congregation or in your community to address this, and some sample prods for them to think about. We also give you some suggestions, by the way. Most preachers don't need a 20-minute rebuttal to their sermon when another person gets up to speak. So we do suggest that when possible, you pre-record these and play them back. It gives you some editorial and some time control. That's not always possible, and you can make it work, but do help your people understand what the expectations are around the time they're being given to talk. We talked earlier about maybe bringing in an outside consultant, somebody to kind of hold folks accountable to doing the work that they're being asked to do, and maybe be a speaker on a Sunday. Did we give you some criteria for evaluating whether that would work for you, and then where to look for those kinds of resources? The benefit of an outside consultant, and this comes from capital campaign experience as much as anything, is that when you bring in someone and you're paying them to be present, people are a little more diligent about getting their work done and meeting their responsibilities and being accountable. That's just human nature. And you also have a person who has this 30,000 foot view who can be a guide and just be a gentle reminder of things that need to be done and when they need to be done. Then, of course, as I've already talked about, the theme, that's in that first folder. And again, reinforcing the mission clarity piece, because that's what we're focused on. So the next folder, I think is, there's a subfolder, thanks, Jim, that offers the year-round schedules and calendars and shows you how to lay it out differently. If you want to do a hybrid, but you do a spring campaign, or you want to do a year-round campaign, and what do we need to be doing in the fall? Or if we're going to do a short campaign, what can we do earlier in the year? And then in the run-up, what needs to be done? It's all laid out for you there with dates, suggested dates, which of course you can move as you need to and as fits your context for where your date, where you're asking people to make a commitment, where your invitation is in the calendar. We also throw some other things in, and we're going to keep adding to this file. Like we had some ideas for Pentecost that for that Sunday that help inspire generosity. If you're looking for grants for other income streams, if you want to work with leaders on their own giving and growing in their generosity, how to do a philanthropic autobiography. There's lots of sub-materials, if you will, that accompany this broader piece to help you with the nuts and bolts of doing stewardship education in your congregation. So the second folder is really, that's where the meat and potatoes is from my perspective. This is where the exegesis is, how we connect scripture to the theme and give you ways to talk about it. The material this year has 8 suggested texts. We've had as few as 6 and as many as 12, and we landed this year on 8 that focus around the table. So naturally, the Last Supper is in there, and we actually suggest one. If you're a fall congregation or going to do a year round and want to end in the fall, that World Communion Sunday might be a great place to do your ask in relationship to this theme. And the text is written, the materials around the text are written that way. But so naturally, we've got the feeding of the 5,000, this whole idea that folks from the east, the west, and the north and the south are invited in. We want to deal with that weird language in John about eating Jesus's flesh and drinking his blood. And, we're not vampires here, but, we let's be honest, it's a tough text to preach on. So we've got some resources for that. And we're going to tie it back to this theme. The whole idea of what it was to break bread in the early church, not a surprise here, that's an Acts 2 passage. This other language about the cup and the bread as a sharing the body of Christ and the witness that is in the community and to the larger community. We even have a text this year. We've used the book, the Epistle of Jude or Book of Jude. Is it a letter? Is it a book? I don't know. It's so small. Nobody ever preaches on it. Well, the person who did our exegetical work said, there's some stuff about the table in here. And while it's written, Jude is written with kind of a passing judgment on ill behavior, there are some ways to turn that positively for the church to think about. And so there's a Jude text in there. So you can now say, if you do this program, I've preached from Jude. And of course, from Revelation 3, Jesus at the door, knocking, and the one who answers the door invites me in, I'll come in and sup with him. Again, table language as we're thinking about bread and cup to faith and giving. But this material is rich. This material, quite honestly, this folder is worth what all the others. I mean, this is what you're paying. In my opinion, this is worth what you're paying for, and all the rest of it's bonus. Because we need help with this in preaching. We need help with this in teaching. So the third folder thinks about then this larger piece of how does this work in worship? How do I get my theme in worship to integrate with what I'm preaching about and carry over this bread and cup, faith and giving theme throughout the year? So we've got these really nice liturgical resources that have a call to worship and invocation, prayer, confession, invitation to communion, offering, prayer, benediction, and even some suggested hymns. Now, I must confess that for the Canadian Presbyterians, we You came to the party late. We'd already written these materials. So we have the Disciples Chalice hymnal and the United Church of Christ New Century hymnal. But I suspect some of these songs will translate into Canadian Presbyterian hymn books. And at least you'll know where to look for them or something like them in your own resources. But these are nice, well-written pieces. And again, you may not do all these things in your time of worship. So you modify them and use them as works best for you. Now, we mentioned here, we'll go to folder 3. Oh, we're going to stop. All right. I'll shut up and listen.
Well, yeah, Heather.
We do have one question. And in terms of this particular program, is there wisdom in keeping capital project campaigns and current needs campaigns completely separate?
Our experience has been that having some space, preferably about 6 months space between a capital campaign and an annual invitation you're probably more beneficial to do that so they don't get muddled and confused, because you have a different case statement with a capital project. Your case statement is around why do we need to make these improvements or build this addition or raise money to hire this staff person or whatever your capital campaign is for, that's separate from the normal workings of your mission and vision. It should certainly be built into that and enhance that vision. There's got to be a correlation to why you're doing this, even if it's just because we got a leaky roof and worship's a part of our life together. And by golly, we got to fix the roof because the roof is over our platform for mission and our central hub for gathering, right? It's not just about the leaks in the roof. So we think that's important to keep them separate because their goals are separate. The timing often for how long you're going to receive gifts for capital campaign or project is longer. Often 3 to 5 years, or maybe a series of campaigns over a dozen years. So you want to keep that message clear and separate from, but coupling, making sure that you show how that fits with that broader mission of which you're a part. Does that make sense? And I'm open to rebuttal.
Made sense to me.
You got a thanks. So thanks very much. I think that's it for questions right now, Bruce.
All right. Well,
I just wanted to say, Bruce, in what you were saying, one of the things that you make a big deal about in your materials is the importance of celebration and gratitude. Yes. So having, these are moments and occasions for celebration, the conclusion of campaigns. So having one right after the other, wouldn't be as impactful either.
That's absolutely right. And I want to remind you all of the importance of saying thank you. It's one of the conditions we see present in thriving churches. Though there's some things we see present in churches that are thriving that relate to stewardship. Obviously, one is leadership and its own commitment to giving and generosity. The next is clarity of vision. The next one that follows that is education, that you're teaching this as spiritual practice, and there's an expectation then around giving. The communication is clear about what you do, why you do it, why it matters, and that you have good internal controls and other trust factors so that you're transparent and people know that you're handling their money wisely, and that you're saying thank you, that you're expressing gratitude at every opportunity you get. So the fourth folder where I was heading to go along with these 8 texts for preaching is also separately curriculum for small group. And it's designed so it could be a 45-minute lesson on Sunday morning in a Sunday school setting, or has some expandable elements that can allow it to be a weeknight study if you do a 60 or 90-minute study, that there's some flexibility in there. But the idea is to be now reinforcing and engaging the text that the preacher will be or just preached on, right? You could do it either way. We hear, good results both ways, prepping the congregation for the sermon or taking them deeper afterward. And some congregations don't do some of the preaching we suggest, but they run the Bible study. And they see that working in place of, because it doesn't fit with the lectionary or whatever the preacher's proclivities are toward choosing text and preaching. But the lay leadership says we still need to explore these things. And so you can do that even if the preacher isn't picking them up or takes a different tack. And you can do these online, right? I mean, that's one of the gifts that the pandemic brought us, was that we all became televangelists, whether we wanted to or not. We've all learned how to do this and how to engage people without them having to physically be present. And so if you don't do a weekly Bible study normally, or do Sunday school in a real small congregation, maybe you preach on Sunday, and then on Wednesday after at 11 o'clock in the morning, or whenever it works for your people and your context, you do a 45-minute to an hour Zoom conversation and use this curriculum. And you can send them the curriculum electronically in advance. We don't have to kill trees. We don't have to use carbon footprints, to get to places. We can do it online and be good stewards yet in another way. But the important thing, of course, is giving people that spiritual foundation and biblical theological encounter so they really do mature in this element of faith. The fifth folder, children are a part of our congregation, and not just the future, but they are the now. And getting them to think about their own generosity and how they experience it and how they can be generous is important. And many of our congregations have a moment for children on Sunday morning. So there's children's resources there. There are children's sermons already in the materials you'll receive if you download it today. And there's a children resource section coming in the future for Sunday school or small groups for kids, because it's never too early to have this conversation. And they want to be a part of it. Everybody else is filling out a card and all excited about what they're doing. There's a way to engage the children in this same process and develop those good habits. What is it? Train up a child in the way he or she should go, and they'll never depart from it, right? So that's in there. Folder 6 is a series of communication packets to be run during the campaign that have sample letters and ideas for communication on social media, etc. This is a set of folders that will be added to as the year goes on. So you'll get an email after you've registered and received this, and you'll get an email from us. We got to work that out with your office yet, but we'll make sure that happens. We generate an email to the people who bought the product in the States and bring them up to date about when the next thing is that's being added or what's recently been added to the folder. And we'll be sure that we work with Karen and Jim to make that happen for you all as well.
And also, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second, Bruce.
Yes.
Just to remind everyone that the PCC will be paying for the digital downloads for Presbyterian congregations in Canada. So if you would like to download the digital materials, you would use the coupon code and you would receive the information for free.
That's wonderful. That is, what a generous gift. And I'm very pleased to know you're doing that. I know that was worked out with my UCC partners and collaborators who've been working on this material with us. And I'm just delighted to know that. And yeah, you can't go wrong, folks. It's free. You can't lose on this deal. You see the visual photographic artwork that's a little different than the graphic art that was there earlier at the beginning of our time. So you have multiple ways to communicate visually the theme of the program. This is an idea of one of the bulletin inserts that comes with the materials. And so this one has a story from a UCC missionary, and then also that monthly giving chart to remind people of a percentage of their own income as a way to factor what their giving might be in the encouragement to grow in that giving by 1%. And so those tithing charts, if you will, those monthly income charts as a percentage of income giving show up on some of those bulletin inserts. I think there's 5 or 6 of those inserts available to you, as well as a worship folder itself, if you want that material that's contained within the folders. The 7th folder is where you'll find things like that. The artwork, there's letterhead, graphic information that you can use to create your own letterhead, to create a return envelope. There's information on electronic giving in here. Now, I don't know who would need this now after the pandemic, but we've in the past have included it and decided maybe somebody hasn't explored this yet, so we'll put that in there. But there's worship bulletins. There's also some thoughts around legacy giving, which is a part of our stewardship. And we put that in there to remind you that that's another part of the conversation that you should be having throughout the year with your people, as they think about gifts from their accumulated resources. So as you can see, this is pretty complete stuff. There's a lot of material in here.
I just would interject as well that we in the stewardship department are very happy to help churches set up electronic giving. If they haven't set it up yet, we can help you figure out e-transfer if need be, and we can help you figure out online giving via credit card and debit card. And we have lots of material to help with legacy giving as well, and we're more than happy to help out.
This material, I created the structure of this material and the layout for this material based on 25 years of being a parish pastor and what I wanted. What would have been helpful to me as a pastor? What are the resources that I felt I didn't have that I wanted access to? What are some other ways to think about stewardship? What are some tools I could use to communicate with my congregation? That's what's in this packet. At the end of the day, this was created out of what I needed as a pastor. And while I've been in this job now 12 years, I don't think those needs have changed much for the parish pastor. And this is really designed to be a toolbox. We're not preaching your sermons for you. You know, that's exegesis, and you've got to do the work, because good preachers don't want to preach other people's sermons and they don't fit in your context. But you want to do a good job of the spade work on the text so you're faithful to the message. And help somebody help me see why this relates to stewardship. I had a professor in seminary who said, at the end of the day, every text is a stewardship text. And I've decided 40 years later, he was right.
I've actually taken your course at Lexington Theological Seminary on stewardship. And yes, that's what you teach, indeed.
I'm consistent, if nothing else, Jim.
Nothing else. I should mention among folder 7 includes the pledge card, which is that culminating invitation at the end of a consecration day program. We have an example of the one that you offer in your program, which can be adapted. And would you walk us through what this is and what it's for?
Well, sure. We're hoping that people will give us an intention for what they plan to do in the coming year. This helps us with budgeting as we try to income budget and get a sense of what we might expect from the congregation. But perhaps more importantly, it gives them a chance to be intentional about their gift. The Apostle Paul, at the end of the first letter to the Corinthians in chapter 16, says, set aside on the first day of the week the gift that you're going to give. Now, he's building that in, of course, to the Jerusalem offering, which we'll learn more about in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. But what it suggests to me is that the whole notion of offering and giving is intentional, planned for and thought out, prayed about, and in general is a spiritual exercise. And so while this helps the church get an idea of what to plan for on the income side, more importantly, it gives the individual a chance to sort of make a covenant with themselves about what they want to do, and to be able to hold themselves accountable to that because they've come up with a number. And if you're communicating with folks quarterly about the nature of their giving, they're going to be reminded about how they're doing on that. Now, you're not going to just send them numbers, by the way. The first 2 words on the page are going to be thank you. And you're going to remind them of all the good things the church is doing and name some specific mission you're engaged in that's making a difference. And by the way, to date, here's a record of what we have of your giving. Please be sure that your records are matching ours. And if there's a problem, contact the financial secretary or bookkeeper so we can straighten it out. That's a good quarterly letter. So one other folder in here is we've taken all the 8 texts and we've organized them by text so that the exegesis, worship, small group, and children's resources are all in one place for that text. So it's kind of like indexing it, but rather than having it be links within the material, we just went ahead and dragged it all to one place for you. You can open that folder and then open the Revelation 3 folder, and all the resources for Revelation 3 are there. And that's just to make it easier for your use. My colleague, Andrew Warner from the United Church of Christ, who's in their Optic ministry, which is their stewardship and philanthropy office, and I are holding office hours as a part of using this material, and you'll get an email that reminds you these are coming. We're holding just an open Zoom meeting for conversation and questions on April 28th, August 18, September 15. That's all what we would assume to be ahead of or during your campaign season for questions, and also a chance to share what's working, right? Hey, we tried this, or we're going to do this. We think this will be really helpful. And then on the 15th of December, we're going to have a wrap up where people can give us some good, helpful criticism about what worked and what didn't, tell us their celebration stories, share with us ideas they had, things they'd like to see when we launch the material in 2023. And so we hope that you'll get those on your calendar and plan to be a part of those. And again, it's just you get it with the material, you get us, so we can answer specific questions that you have. The goal is to help you fund your mission and ministry. It's a dynamic resource that will adjust to the size of your congregation, the culture and context in which you're working, gives you a lot of flexibility. Additional resources will be continually added, and they're pretty hard not to use. I mean, it's pretty easy to find stuff based on how the folders are laid out. We're just excited that this resource is going to be available to you. And I'm available to you if you need me, as I know Jim and Karen are. But if you have specific questions about the resources, I will type my email address into the chat. And
Terrific. That's great. Thanks, Bruce.
You all can reach out to me if you have a question.
Yeah.
And thanks for your time. Thank you all for maybe you did fall asleep. Maybe the cat's been watching this for the last 20 minutes. I don't know. But for those of you who've stayed to the bitter end and stayed awake, thanks for the opportunity today. I'm really grateful to have been with you.
Oh, that's great. I will add when I put up the video, I'll add your email address as well to the video. So that's great.
Thanks.
Anyway, a link to the recording of today's presentation and slides will be emailed to all the participants next week once we get it up, and you may share it with anyone who might be interested, and we'd be grateful. Thank you very much from Karen Plater and Heather Chappell and Maggie Young and myself, and especially thank you so much, Bruce, for joining us today and sharing your new wonderful resources with us.
My pleasure. Really glad to be invited, and sorry that my internet was down and you got a static picture of me that some of you may have preferred, actually, for my internet to be down in a static picture. But I really did shave and shower, and I'm wearing my Center for Faith and Giving logo shirt. But we had the winds that you are now getting your way here, and we had gusts last night of 68 miles an hour. Which is about 110 kilometers, I suppose. And so we've got some internet issues here that we're trying to get resolved. And I had to use my phone as a hotspot, which meant not enough bandwidth to be live video. So thanks for your patience on that.
I'm glad you've got unlimited data.
It is a nice plan, yes.
All right, everybody, any other questions before we go? Well, thanks so much for coming.